Flack Talk with James Canning, the podcast with the inside scoop on journalists from San Diego and across the nation. If you're a communications pro, have a nose for news, or you're just nosy, this is the podcast for you. Now here's your host, James Canning.
Hey everyone, welcome to Flack Talk. I'm glad you've joined us today, and here with me is Priya Sridhar from NBC 7. She's their political journalist. Hey Priya, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for being here. Really glad to have you. So, Flack Talk, I appreciate you coming on. This show is all about journalists. We want to learn about you, learn about your career, your personal life, what drives you, those kind of things. And I'm hoping you're ready for some questions today about that kind of stuff.
I am. I'm excited.
Awesome. All right, so let's jump right into it, Priya. What inspired you to become a journalist? Like, was there a moment in your life that led you to want to tell other people's stories?
Yeah, so I took a journalism class in high school, and I think at that time, when you're young, you may only be exposed to very maybe obvious careers like lawyer, doctor, or things that maybe your parents do or your parents' friends do or something like that. So journalism hadn't really occurred to me, but then I took that class, and the more I learned about it, I was just like, wow, this makes a whole lot of sense for someone like me, I think. And I started kind of getting more interested in watching the local news on TV. And I just thought, wow, those people look like they have a lot of fun. Like, they're not sitting at a desk. They get to go out into the community and learn new things every day and meet new people. And it just seemed like kind of a adrenaline junkie kind of profession, which even at a young age, I think I probably would have categorized myself like that. So honestly, I knew that I wanted to be a journalist since I was like 16, which I feel really lucky because I know a lot of my friends in college didn't necessarily know what they wanted to do. And it was super easy for me. I decided when I was 16, and I've never looked back, and I've never regretted it or thought like, this isn't what I want to do with my life. I've always loved it.
Wow. Well, that's great that you knew at an early age. Can you take us briefly through like your path to get to NBC 7 where you are right now?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, it's a little bit of a long path, but I'll try to give the abbreviated version. So like I said, I knew since high school that I wanted to be a journalist. I looked up a lot of bios of people that I admired, like Christiane Amanpour, other, both local news journalists and national news journalists. And so one thing with most of the reporters that I admired, I realized was that they had all gone to liberal arts schools and majored in something like political science or international relations or U.S. history. So I thought, you know what, that's what I'm going to do. And a lot of people ask me about that. They're like, why didn't you go to a school with a journalism major? And I just thought, I feel like having the academic credentials that speak to what I hopefully will report on one day will be valuable. So I kind of rolled the dice, and I ended up at a small liberal arts school in Maine called Bowdoin College. And I ended up majoring in history and international relations. And what's interesting was, looking back, it's sort of funny how you don't really think things through very thoroughly when you're young. And they, like I said, didn't have a journalism major, but they did have, which was very unique for a small college, they had a television station where I'm not quite sure what exactly happened on this television station. They certainly didn't have a news show. So I actually decided with one of my classmates who also had aspirations to be a journalist, let's start the college's first news show. And looking back on it, it was so cringy. We had no idea what we were doing. They had little cameras that the station would lend out to us. And we just went around school and we covered a lot of the same things that the student newspaper would cover. But, no one had taught us how to shoot and edit. So everything, was really shaky. We weren't using tripods. We weren't white balancing things. But we went around and, we were interviewing the student president and even the school president and talking about different issues. And so looking back, it's really sweet, but I just hope that no one really digs out the archives of that time period of my life. Another thing that I think is cool, though, is that, at that time, this is going to show how old I am. People didn't really have laptops. Like, I had a desktop computer in college. And so But we actually figured out, we were like, hey, this show would be kind of cool. It aired all the time. We did it once a week, and I would anchor the show. And because, there wasn't a lot of stuff on the channel, it would air all the time. But we thought, hey, what if there's a way that we could put this like on the internet, and then we could have parents watch it and alumni around the world watch it. So we figured out a way to do that. And yeah, I mean, we got huge interest from parents who wanted to see like sports highlights of their kids who were on the football team, or alumni around the world. It was a great way for them to feel connected to the campus. So yeah, I did all of that. I also was freelance writing for a local newspaper in Maine. I ended up doing a story that got the interest of NBC Nightly News, and they actually called me and they wanted to come to my college and do the same story that I had done. And so me being the feisty little 19-year-old that I was, I asked them, okay, cool. Like, what are you going to give me if I connect you to the story? And they're like, do you want money or something? And I go, no, I want an internship. So I was going to study abroad in London, and they were like, okay, we'll hook you up with the London bureau chief. And I ended up interning there while I was in London. I decided, while I was in London, that I want to try out an international news channel. So I was like literally hanging around outside CNN International, and people were coming in and out. And I said, who can I talk to about internships? Figured out the correct person, went in there, took a current events test, a writing test. They gave me a shift. So then I had I was working at NBC, CNN, and I was going to school, and it was crazy. Yeah. I mean, I remember riding on the tube, and I would make people coffee and get them their newspapers and assist them on their shoots and carry their tripod. And the whole time I just kept thinking like, one day I just want to be these reporters. This is like so amazing. So after that, I applied to Northwestern, went to grad school, got my master's in journalism. I ended up moving back to Maine. That was my very first local news market. And then after that, there was a boom in international news channels that kind of tried to market themselves being like Al Jazeera, but we saw RT, Russia Today, pop up, CCTV, which was the Chinese version. Now there's a channel that's called TRT, which is like the Turkish version. All of these channels are in English, and the way that they advertise themselves is giving a different perspective on world news to English-speaking audiences around the world. So I ended up basically getting recruited to work for RT in Washington, D.C., and I was an anchor and a correspondent. I did that for a few years, and then they actually sent me over to South Asia, and I was the South Asia bureau chief. I was posted in New Delhi. Wow. I did that for a few years, and yeah, that was a crazy experience because I was essentially running a little business in India, which, I mean, yes, I had visited India as a child because my parents are Indian immigrants, but trying to like set up a bureau in a country like that was pretty wild.
Can I ask this question? Like, around what age are you when you get to do that?
Okay, at this time, I was in India from 26 to 28 years old, and that was one of the beauties of RT was that, they would take like young people and give them these incredible opportunities. And so after I'd interned for NBC and CNN in London, I had actually asked CNN, is there any way you can like transfer my internship to New Delhi? And I ended up living with my aunt and uncle, and I interned there. But my essay that I wrote, my admissions essay for to get into Northwestern, I basically talked about how even though it was an incredible experience working for CNN International in New Delhi, I thought that there was so much better reporting that could have been done out of that bureau, that I felt like they were doing a lot of very stereotypical stories about India, where they would go into the slums and sort of interview people who were living on less than $1 a day, or they would go to these like obscure villages and interview villagers who were swallowing fish to cure asthma, and all these like really kind of outrageous things. And in my mind, I thought, well, India is one of the biggest democracies in the world. It has one of the biggest economies in the world. Like, this is a booming country, and there's a lot happening here. And I just didn't feel like they were really covering all sort of aspects of the country. And so that's what I wrote my Northwestern essay on. So when RT decided, we think it would be really interesting to put a person of Indian origin in India who might be able to understand more what a global audience would want, but isn't going to be necessarily culturally shocked by India. I was like kind of hesitant. Obviously, at the age of 26, I'm like, do I want to move to the other side of the world? Of course, I had some relatives, but I thought, am I going to make friends? Like, am I going to have a social life? Like all the normal things you would think when you're 26.
Right.
But then that little essay that I had written to get myself into Northwestern, I thought to myself, I would be, a huge fraud to write an essay like that. And then to get an opportunity to run a bureau where I can basically do whatever I want. They're going to give me a travel budget. I can go wherever I want and do the stories that I want. I mean, you don't get that many opportunities like that in your career. So yeah, I went for it. That was between the ages of 26 and 28, came back to the United States, I think it's important for me to say this, and I always try to say this when I tell my trajectory. I was unemployed for almost a year after that, and that was a really difficult time. And that sadly is very commonplace in my industry. So, I started panicking. There was a little bit of depression that set on. I was freaking out, like, will I ever get a job again? And then thank God, after like 11 months of being unemployed, I got a job at the Associated Press in Chicago. So I went back there, and I worked there for about a year. And then I ended up going back to DC, and I worked for another international news channel called Arise, which was headquartered out of Nigeria. And I was the Washington correspondent for them. And then on the weekends, I would travel to New York City, and I hosted a morning show 2 hours live on Saturday and Sunday with Richard Pryor's daughter.
Wow, Richard Pryor's daughter.
Yeah, it was totally out of my comfort zone. If you guys ever watch morning shows, you probably notice they will do like exercise routines, or they'll like show you how to cook something and then you have to eat it. And so, I mean, never in my wildest dreams would I ever think that I was like a morning show kind of person.
Wait, is that the kind of stuff that they did on that morning show?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we did just different segments. I mean, it was kind of like the Today Show or Good Morning America, except, yeah. So there was, we definitely did do hard news sometimes, or we'd have panels to talk about different issues. But then there were lighter stuff because it was a morning show and it was a weekend morning show. So, and it was just funny because when I was at Northwestern, my professors used to always say to me, Priya, you're really good at doing like the hard stories, the complex stories, the serious stories, the global stories. They're like, smiling on camera, that just like doesn't come very naturally to you,
Geez.
So, but they were like, that's fine. If you find your niche, you can just consistently go for jobs that highlight what your skill set is. But if you want to be like more versatile and well-rounded, that might be something you want to work on. And so I sort of always remembered that in the back of my mind. And the other thing I always tell young people when they sort of call me up and say, hey, I want to be a journalist, is especially in the beginning of your career, and by beginning, I mean like the first 10 years, I just said yes to anything anyone would offer me, pretty much. And I do think that it did make me a much stronger, well-rounded reporter. So yeah, again, going from White House to morning show co-host, I was like, that's a very weird combination. But now, if you're a news junkie, you might know that Kristen Welker is the White House correspondent, and on the weekends she co-hosts the Today Show. And Savannah Guthrie was the White House correspondent, and now she's the co-host of the Today Show on the weekdays. So it's actually not that weird of a transition, and I think you can do both. You can do hard news and you can do soft news, and if that's what you're interested, you can do it all. So after that, I had to like take a step back and think in my head, like, what is my actual goal, like big picture goal? Yeah. And my big picture goal was always to do national or international news for a mainstream American news channel that people watched, right? Mm-hmm. And so I talked to an agent, and they were like, you need to go back into like doing local news in the US. So that was another very strange transition, where I had just gone from reporting from all over India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, Indonesia, Nigeria, London, all of the White House, New York City. And they were like, this might involve not getting paid a lot. You might not have a cameraman. You might have to, what we call MMJ, which means you're operating your own camera, you're editing your own stories, you're doing it all. You might have to work on the weekends. Are you willing to make those sacrifices given everything you've already done? And I thought, you know what? This is my dream. I'm willing to do it. So at the age of, I think at this point, we're like 31 years old, I went back to San Antonio, Texas, and lived with my parents. And I worked, on the weekends. I was an MMJ. I'm doing local news. And there were definitely a few times during those 2 years where I was like, what in the world is happening? Like, I could have just gone from Bangor, Maine, my first local news market, to San Antonio, Texas. There was no need to do all of this random stuff that I had done for 7 or 8 years. And so there was a lot of like mental struggle in that too, where I often wondered, like, would all of those other experiences like ever make sense one day? Like, would they be noticed? Does it even matter? Should I just be happy that I had those experiences? So that was a lot. And then during that time period, I also commissioned into the Navy to be an officer in the Navy Reserve. And so the Navy started flying me out here to San Diego for my drills. I had never been to San Diego in my life. And when I landed, I was like, this place is paradise. So once my contract was up in San Antonio, I was like, I want to go to San Diego and get a journalism job there. So I ended up coming here. I worked for KPBS for a few years, which is the NPR and PBS stations. And then I had the itch to go back to do TV full time. And I was super lucky that NBC had the political reporter position open,
right.
And also to host Politically Speaking. So that's what I currently do. Got that job right before the pandemic really went into full swing in March of 2020. So I've been doing it for about 3 years, and it's been really awesome. Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a fantastic career story, right? I mean, you've kind of had twists and turns throughout the entire thing. I want to get to the Navy thing in a second, but before we go, because you mentioned this, and I want to dig a little bit deeper. But so after all of that experience and all that time and all those places, how would you describe your journalism style? Like, is there someone you craft your style after, and if so, why? Yeah, what is your style? I mean, because you've seen so much. You've been a part of so many different ways of doing news.
Yeah, and I feel like you and I have talked about this before, James, but I think one thing I definitely noticed was there are certain themes that are common to people, no matter where you live, literally in the world or in the country. So I would say that, some of those themes are survival and family and love and chasing your dreams, right? So I think that whenever I think about stories that do really well, and by do really well, I mean they either go viral online or I get a lot of good feedback from them, they usually involve those themes in some way. And yeah, I mean, the people in India or the people in Bangor, Maine, or the people here in San Diego, they all love stories that are like that. And I've done stories like that in each place I've ever worked. So I would say that is probably one of my sort of trademarks or the things that I go for. I also, in this job in particular, one of the things that my boss has told me is, when you're a political journalist, you're supposed to hold the powerful accountable, right? So this is where you and I have worked together a lot,
right?
Is you obviously work for an elected leader and I am the one who interviews those people. So, try to dig a little bit deeper when they have like some sort of policy proposal. How is that actually going to work? And then to remember to follow up with people and see, are there tangible results, or are there people who benefited from these ideas, or where did things go wrong and how can we fix them? And we saw so much of that during COVID, especially because there were all these ideas of, hey, the state or the federal government is going to give money to people who are struggling right now. But oftentimes the way that money was distributed, or people didn't know that it existed. So they would kind of fall through the cracks. And so it was important to not just report on, hey, here's what the government's doing for you. It's like, is it actually reaching the destinations that they had intended it to reach and doing the things that it was supposed to do? So I think doing that sort of full circle stuff is also really important, not just do the press conference with the announcement, but then track down the results afterwards.
No, that's right. I mean, your job is to hold us accountable. Your job and every other journalist holds elected officials accountable, businesses, all types of folks accountable. I mean, that's the power of journalism that we have here. So you're holding people accountable as a journalist, but then on the weekends you're like running 25 miles and, like going through boot camp? Like what, tell us about the Navy Reserves a little bit. What, you kind of mentioned you got into it, but what is that like, and how does that work with your journalism role and your reserve role?
So when I was living in India, a lot of my close friends ended up being American expats. And so a lot of the people who were in India worked for the State Department. So they were working for the American Embassy in New Delhi. And obviously, before I lived in India, I knew that there were embassies in other countries. And I theoretically knew that there were people who worked in those embassies, but I had never really actually kind of been in touch with those people or been friends with those people or seen how the whole lifestyle works. And once I started befriending them, I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And so I mentioned to you that really tough time when I came back to the US and I was unemployed for 11 months. And so at that point, I was really having an identity crisis, which is another thing I will say that I think happens to a lot of TV reporters or just reporters in general is because we get into this industry at such a young age and we make so many personal sacrifices and we're constantly moving all over the country, there comes a time where either you're going through one contract ended and you're looking to get your next gig, or you could have been laid off because sadly that happens oftentimes too. And you sort of lose your entire identity because you're so used to being Priya, the TV reporter. So people in my life started asking me, is there anything else that you're interested in doing that you could pursue? And so I thought, I do like the idea of serving my community in some ways. That's what I love about being a journalist. And I love international relations. I love other cultures. So I'd actually applied to be a foreign service officer or a diplomat in the State Department. I ended up getting through that entire process. And at the exact same time was when and it takes such a long time, that I got the job offer at the Associated Press. And so I knew I had to keep going with the journalism stuff because that's what I really loved. However, there was a little piece of me in the back of my head that was like, oh, that State Department thing was starting to sound cooler and cooler the more I was going through the process. So one of my friends from college, I mentioned it to him and he said, there's a very similar program in the Navy Reserve where they recruit for different sort of communities or military occupational specialties. They try to recruit people from the civilian world who have, interesting resumes that they think can augment the military. So one of them happened to be public affairs. And so those are people who are communications specialists or people who have worked in the media or know how to engage in the media. So even you, James, you would be a perfect candidate if you're interested.
I don't know if I could do enough pull-ups, Priya. I'm not sure if I could do enough pull-ups to get in.
All these, it's the government and bureaucracy. That part of it, right? It can sometimes move extremely slowly. So I always tell people, if you're interested, just submit a package. And then by the time you find out, you can be a bodybuilder in that amount of time. Trust me. So yeah, I just decided, he asked me, what do you think? You can travel overseas, learn about public affairs, learn about all that stuff. And I go, it sounds a little nuts, but why not? So I put a package in, went through all the interview process, and it took over a year. By the time I got the phone call that I was selected, I had almost forgotten that I had done it because I just sort of put it in the back of my head. And then it was one of those things, and I tell people this a lot too, the way that I make decisions often is I think to myself, am I going to regret that I did this or am I going to regret that I didn't do this? And with the military, I was like, I feel like if I don't go for it and give it a shot, I'm always going to look back on that fork in the road and think, what if I had done it? So yeah, the next thing you know, I'm shipping off to Newport, Rhode Island to do the officer indoctrination course. And in my opinion, it was one of the best decisions of my life. I met some of my very best friends through the Navy. I've taken public affairs courses. I'm currently taking what they call joint professional military education, which is you can turn it into another master's degree through the Naval War College. And so I'm learning all about joint maritime operations. I'm taking these classes at night. So in addition to working, which is a lot, but
you're a busy woman, Priya. You are a busy
woman. I like learning new things. And also I will say that there's some sense of security in knowing that if I ever do get laid off or I have another period of unemployment, I can always sort of look to the Navy to go somewhere and sort of pick up orders to do something. And I've gotten to travel to South Korea last year, Thailand, Alaska, Hawaii, all kinds of cool places, met super interesting people from all over the world. So yeah, it's nice. And now my identity isn't fully Priya, the TV reporter. It's like, as I've gotten older, I've realized that it's important to have like hobbies and interests and even, other passions that you pursue. And so you're not so tunnel vision, because I think that's when life can just be a little too dramatic.
Yeah, no, that you're spot on. You've hit the fountain of wisdom there, Priya. You have. Hey, so I got a couple more questions before we hit into our breaking news round, and I'll tell you about that in a minute.
Okay.
But you talked about like those other interests, those things to be engaged in outside of the newsroom. In your personal life, I remember learning like through social media, you had this new person thing in your life called Chulis. Can you tell us about that? And I know it's not so new now, but I remember when I used to see it, what Chulis, well, tell folks.
Yes. So what's funny about my dog too is that like that's actually how I get recognized by people oftentimes, is the dog, not me, because that's all I post about on social media. But I did the very cliche thing during COVID where I was living alone and suddenly separated from the entire universe. I had just started a brand new job and we were embedded. So we had one cameraman and one reporter who were always a team. So I only saw this one other human all the time, and that was it. And then the random people we would interview. So I got lonely like a normal human. And I was just like, oh, it feels so silent. And so it started, I just started like browsing dogs on the internet. Mm-hmm. And then I found this amazing animal rescue. It's called the Animal Pad. I'm going to give them a little shout out right here. And they, rescue a lot of Mexican street dogs. And also they'll take dogs from the Ensenada Humane Society because they're super overwhelmed with their numbers and they're basically always at capacity. So they'll bring these dogs over and rehome them here in San Diego, but even all over California and the US. So yeah, I remember when I met my dog, I was like, oh, she looks like, James, you've met my dog.
Yes, I've met her.
She looks like a baby deer is the way that I would describe her. Also, people think she looks like Santa's little helper from The Simpsons. But yeah, she kind of became my sidekick. And the next thing you know, I always somewhat silently judged people who like put little clothes on their pets. But now I have a whole section of my closet with tiny little hangers and tiny little sweatshirts and jackets and outfits. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but she genuinely gets cold all the time. So yeah, no, she was great for my mental health during the pandemic because she has so much energy. So she always wants to go to dog parks or the beach or on hikes or on these long walks. And it's good to like get out of the house, walk around, get fresh air. When I would go to these places, I would also meet other people, and then that would spark a conversation because we had the shared interest of loving dogs. And so it really helped so much more than I had originally anticipated. I was just like, oh, it'll be cute to have a little furry stuffed animal type thing to like cuddle with. But now I'm obsessed with her, as you know, and she sort of comes everywhere with me.
Yeah.
So,
well, did you, I mean, this, having Chulis, didn't this spark like a idea for like a story that you were working on, or a way to show a story that you were working on with an elected in town or something like that? And then it like kind of caused a little fervor online. People were chirping at you a certain way. I don't know.
Yeah. So Mayor Todd Gloria had also adopted a Chihuahua mix during the pandemic in very like around the same time period that I did, And one thing I like to do with all kinds of people that I interview is people are usually nervous, not necessarily people like Todd Gloria. He's very well versed in speaking to the media. But it's nice, especially when you interview the same people over and over and over again, to learn a little bit about their personal lives or things outside of the topics that you're discussing. So him and I had sort of started talking about the dog thing, and then he's like, where do you get your dog sweaters? And oh my gosh, I can't believe you created this little. So it was always sort of this running joke where whenever I saw him, we would talk about the dog and the newest accessories for the dog and the ridiculous things we've done with our dogs. So, Mayor Gloria is the first openly gay mayor here in San Diego.
Yes.
And I think we were doing something around like Pride Month. And so we had discussed like, hey, why don't we do an interview where we talk about that? And because it wasn't like a hard news segment where I was asking him questions about a new policy idea or something like that, I was just like, he thought, okay, well, where should we do it? And it started out like, let's go on a walk around Hillcrest. and that happens to be where I live. And so as a joke, I said, we should walk our dogs around Hillcrest and do it as like a dog walk. Just because I thought, it'd be fun. And also like, I think people like to see, you would know too, elected leaders being humans, or even TV reporters being humans. People like that authenticity. And so he jumped on the idea. He's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do it. So we did it, and it was funny because he had like a security person, and then we had my cameraman, and then some of his staffers, and everyone was sort of trying to stay out of the shot. And so his dog Diego actually did a number 2 during the interview, which these are the things when you have like, animals involved in TV, it's like, they don't know. And it was just hilarious because the mayor actually, stopped and used the little doggy poop bag and picked it, and it made him even more human. And he started posting about it on Instagram. He said it was Diego's TV debut, and this is what he decided to do. So people found that part hilarious. But on the flip side of that, I did get some trolls on Twitter who said, oh, look at Priya chumming up with the mayor and going on a dog walk. And so, I mean, I
Come
always
on,
like
people. Come on.
I mean, and again, it would be one thing if we were like walking our dogs and talking about like the homelessness crisis. That might be weird. But with this, it was like talking about his personal life and like his life story and all of it. So to me, it felt okay. And yeah, it's weird because some of my mentors have seen some of my work and they were like, oh, I love that you did that. So you never know when you take a risk. You're probably going to get people who think it's a brilliant idea, and then you're going to get people who say that was incredibly stupid. You also develop a very thick skin, I think, in this business because you just can't let those types of feedback get to you too much.
Right. No, that's right. That thick skin matters. Okay, so I got one more question before we hit the breaking news round.
Okay.
So folks might not know this, but you've won an Emmy, which is a big deal in the journalism biz, especially when you are a television journalist. Can you talk to us about what you won it for? I think it was you and I have kind of talked about this in the past, but I think our viewers would really be interested to know what it was all about, because as you kind of mentioned earlier, love sells. People love love.
Yes. Yeah. Well, this is one of those stories where when you try to explain it to someone, it sounds a little weird, but I'm so thankful that my management at the time took a risk, and they're like, all right, Priya, this sounds a little weird, but you seem very insistent that you want to do this, so just go ahead and do it. So it was basically, I had seen a Facebook post with a local real estate agent who started, he took a picture of this 93-year-old man who had a walker, and he had seen him on the side of the road at the very beginning of the pandemic, mind you. This is like May of 2020, and this guy is walking down the road with his walker and a mask on his face, but he's also hitchhiking. And so of course this random real estate agent like stops his car and he's like, where are you trying to go, sir? And he said, oh, I'm trying to go to the dollar store. So the guy's like, all right, I'll take you, get in the car. So he drives this man all the way to the dollar store, and then he's like, what are you trying to buy here? And he said, I'm trying to buy Hershey's chocolate bars, because him and his girlfriend, that was their nightly tradition, was they would eat like a little block of Hershey's chocolate. So anyway, and now him and this real estate agent have become friends, and he calls him up. The 93-year-old man will call up the real estate guy. I think his name is Rich Farmer. And he started taking him grocery shopping. So it's just one of those nice stories where people oftentimes say, oh, the reason I don't watch the news is because it's all doom and gloom. It's crime. It's all about the world falling apart. But, I do think we do try to look for those inspirational stories, or in that story in particular, it was someone who did a nice gesture for a stranger and then formed this kind of weird, unlikely friendship. And then I think the great twist at the end was why the guy was hitchhiking, which is he wanted to get chocolate for the love of his life. And I asked all of them, I was like, well, how far was the dollar store? And they're like, oh, it's like 1.5 miles from where he lives.
Wow.
So this 93, he was prepared with his little walker to go on a 3-mile round trip journey for this chocolate. And by the way, I should mention, so Saturday Night Live did a little spoof on the story because they found it hilarious. The Today Show was actually going to air part of it, but it never actually worked out. But because it got so much reception across the country, Hershey's actually contacted us and they were like, we want to give this man a lifetime supply of Hershey's chocolate.
Oh, wow.
So then we went back into the second story where he like received all of this Hershey's chocolate. So he would never, but genuinely, I think this guy, it doesn't even matter. He'll find a reason to go do this like 3-mile journey because he was just such a great character, and everyone in the story was just so likable and unique in their own weird way that, yeah, so that's the story that won an Emmy for human interest. So I think that's like another, I've been saying this all throughout our interview just now, like, take a risk. If you think something might be good, like go check it out. And sometimes it doesn't always pan out the way you want it to, but when it does, it's like, gosh, that's like a grand slam. And it's so exciting too, when you just see like, wow, that these people are so incredible and their story's so great. And those are the stories that, I always get like really hyper when I have a story like that. I don't know how to explain it, but I just get so energized that I want everyone to see it, and I get really excited about them.
No, that's cool. We're going to post that the link to that story in the description for this podcast, because I think that's great for people to watch that. Hey, so we're going to go into the breaking news round before we wrap it up here. So this breaking news round is like, breaking news. But we've learned a lot about you already. But these are like little breaking pieces, like little things that we should learn that are a little bit more personal maybe. Things that, we won't go too far, but a few questions. So, okay. So who is your dream interview and why?
Oh my gosh. I would say I've had like a very big obsession with Ted Turner. He's the guy who created CNN.
Yep.
And what I love about him is that people thought he was crazy. They were like, no one's going to watch 24-hour news. Like obviously that wasn't the case. Now there's so many different 24-hour news channels. And he became passionate about like bison conservation, and he started restaurants, and he was also an avid sailor. And it just goes back to like, I just love people who pursue all of their passions and interests and just go so hardcore into all of them and aren't scared to take a risk, even if everyone says like, this seems like a crazy idea, because you just never know. So yeah, I would say he's definitely always been on the top of my list of someone I've wanted to meet. Got it.
That's good. Okay, so reporter, busy, obviously you get the reserves, you're taking classes, you got your day job, you get Chulies. How do you stay up? Is it caffeine? Is it coffee? I don't know. Do you got some kind of something you do? Like, how do you keep going?
Yes, I'm a huge coffee addict. I love cold brew. I'm trying to not get like the super sugary coffees anymore, but I almost feel like I can't, this is bad, but I feel like I can't form logical sentences in the morning until I've actually had coffee in my system. And then I would say another big one is working out. I'm sort of addicted to Orange Theory, which is a high intensity interval training gym that I go to like around 6 times a week. And it completely changes my mood every day. And it just gives me so much energy. And I'm all about it.
That's awesome. So final breaking news round question, if I read right, you've been to like 37 countries. You've seen the 7 new wonders of the world, which I don't even know what those are. But, what's been your favorite place to visit?
Oh, my gosh. So, I mean, India will always have a special place in my heart, obviously, because that's where my parents are from. And I would say the fact that I got an opportunity to live there for 2 years was even cooler, because I got to really go to the touristy places, but then also to experience a country as a journalist is totally different, because you have access to people that you would probably never encounter if you were just in a social setting or just doing the tourist thing. So I've found, which I know is like a strange answer to this question, that I actually enjoy experiencing other countries more as a journalist than I do as a tourist, just because, so India was up there, and then Nigeria was also one that I unexpectedly fell in love with, but it's also a British colony. It had a lot of similar vibes to India, just a beautiful culture, beautiful art, like music, all of the things. And yeah, I loved it. So those two are probably at the top of my list.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, Priya, this has been wonderful. Before we let you go from Flack Talk here, just like you ask folks when you interview them, is there anything else, any final thoughts you'd like to share with the Flack Talk listeners?
Oh my gosh. No, I would just say, like, a lot of people ask me, what's your sort of life philosophy, or where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I've given up on that a long time ago, because when I was 23, graduating from Northwestern, I always thought I want to be in a top 10 local news market by 30 and win an Emmy. And that turned out to not be farther from what actually ended up happening. But I never in my wildest dreams would have thought I would have gone to live in India for 2 years. I never would have thought I was going to join the military. I never would have thought I was going to host my own show in San Diego. So I've just learned to kind of roll with everything, be open to new experiences and opportunities. And life isn't always, this upward ladder. It's like a jungle gym. And the more you swing or slide or do all these different things, you're practicing different skills, learning new ones, finding out things that you might be interested in that you never knew about. So that's kind of the way I've tried to approach things after I gave up on my weird 10-year plan that I made when I was like 20.
Well, Priya, you've done marvelous, not just on this podcast, but obviously throughout your career. And I think that's a fantastic analogy. Life is like a jungle gym. I'm going to use that now. I think I love that. So, hey, I want to really thank you for joining us here on Flack Talk, Priya. Thanks for making the time today.
Thanks. I really enjoyed it.
All right, folks. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
If you liked Flack Talk and want to learn more about your favorite muckrakers and newsbreakers, please hit the subscribe button or visit flacktalk.com. New Flack Talk episodes with James Canning air every other Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.